What if Nike already knows Alex Eala is going to become a global tennis superstar, and the rest of the tennis world is only now catching up? Think about what is happening around this 21-year-old Filipina. She has reached a career-high number 18, won her first WTA title in Washington, built an international fan base that keeps getting louder, and now there are reports of major Nike advertising around New York ahead of the 2026 US Open. Here is what makes that interesting. Eala is not the highest-ranked player in women's tennis. She has never won a Grand Slam, she is still only 21. So why does Nike's treatment of her appear to be bigger than her resume suggests? Maybe the answer isn't where Alex Eala ranks today. Maybe it's where Nike believes she is going. And the clues started appearing before the Washington Trophy ever existed. Go back to Wimbledon 2025. It's when Eala was already becoming one of the most interesting young players in the sport, Nike created a custom Sampaguita-inspired hair accessory for her. Sampaguita is the national flower of the Philippines. So, this wasn't just another piece of tennis equipment sitting on the shelf. It connected Eala's appearance on one of tennis's biggest stages directly to where she came from. And that's where the speculation starts to get interesting. A global sports brand doesn't have to create that kind of country-specific detail for every young player. So was Nike simply celebrating Eala's heritage, or was it already beginning to build the identity of a future star? Then came another clue. Eala appeared on the cover of Vogue Philippines wearing Nike, placing her tennis career inside a much larger conversation about Filipino identity and culture. Shortly afterward, she appeared at Nike's New York headquarters and posted the simple words, New York, New York. On its own, that post means almost nothing. But look at the timing. New York was already sitting in the background of Eala's story. And now the 2026 US Open is bringing all of those pieces together. A rising Filipina player, Nike, New York, a rapidly growing audience. Suddenly, the question isn't just what Eala is wearing. It's what kind of athlete Nike may be trying to build. And Eala has given the brand exactly the kind of story that sports marketing thrives on. At the 2025 US Open, she found herself in serious trouble during a deciding tiebreak, down 5-1. Instead of disappearing under the pressure, she fought back 1-7 of the next 8 points and completed a dramatic comeback. She eventually lost in the second round to Kristina Mladenovic. So this wasn't some perfect Grand Slam fairy tale. But that's almost beside the point. The moment itself had everything a global sports brand wants: pressure, adversity, resilience. And a young athlete refusing to disappear when the situation looked finished. Then Eala kept moving. The disappointment didn't stop her. The development continued. And eventually, the breakthrough arrived in Washington. She won her first WTA title, defeated Jessica Pegula in the final, and became the first Filipino player to win a WTA Tour singles title. Her ranking climbed, her audience grew. Suddenly, the player Nike had been supporting wasn't simply a promising junior trying to establish herself. She was becoming a top 20 professional with a national following and international attention. And that's when the Nike theory gets much harder to dismiss. Maybe Nike wasn't betting on the Alex Eala who existed in 2025. Maybe it was betting on the player she was becoming. Because if the brand saw the superstar before the ranking caught up, then the 2026 US Open could be the moment. Everyone else finally starts seeing what Nike may have seen first. Part 1 question. What did Nike see in Alex Eala before the rest of the tennis world caught up? Because Nike doesn't only sell performance, it sells stories. And Alex Eala has something extremely valuable. A story that millions of people can identify with. She's young, she's Filipina, she's rising rapidly. She's already become the first Filipino player to win a WTA Tour singles title. She's inside the top 20. And her identity is inseparable from the audience that's following her rise. That combination is commercially powerful, because Nike doesn't necessarily need Eala to be the biggest player in tennis today. It needs people to believe she could become one. And look at the audience forming around her. The Philippines has more than 100 million people, while Filipino communities stretch across North America, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Eala gives all of those communities something they rarely get in tennis: a young athlete competing at the highest level who represents them directly, But the really important part isn't simply that Filipino fans like Alex. It's what they're actually doing. They're traveling to tournaments, they're buying tickets, they're filling sections with Philippine flags, they're staying late for her matches. They're turning individual tennis sessions into events. That's a very different kind of fandom. And it's an audience. Nike cannot simply manufacture with an advertising budget. That's what I would call the Ayala effect. Alex wins. More people discover her. More people discover her. More fans follow her. More fans create louder crowds and greater attention. Greater attention increases her commercial value. That creates more exposure, which introduces her to even more people. Then the cycle starts again. And now put Nike's global marketing machine inside that cycle. That's where the story gets genuinely interesting, because Nike doesn't have to create the audience from scratch. The audience is already building itself around Ayala. The brand can potentially amplify something that is already happening organically. And there is a reason the Serena Williams and Naomi Osaka comparisons are useful here, but only as context. Nike has previously built enormous campaigns around athletes whose identities extended far beyond what they did on a tennis court. Serena became a cultural icon as much as a champion. Osaka's Japanese and Haitian heritage, personality, and activism became part of the story Nike could tell around her. Alex Eala potentially has some of those same ingredients. That does not mean Nike has officially decided she is the next Serena or Osaka. It hasn't. But the model is recognizable ex-Bontal young athlete, distinctive identity, enormous potential audience, and a story that can travel far beyond the sport itself. Then there is another piece that makes the Nike relationship harder to dismiss. In February 2026, Ayala was brought to Nike's global headquarters in Beaverton, Oregon, where she received a personalized welcome that incorporated Filipino language and cultural references. Again, one appearance doesn't prove some secret master plan, but put it next to the Sampaguita-inspired piece at Wimbledon, the Vogue Philippines cover, the New York connection, and the growing attention around her, and a pattern starts to appear. Nike isn't simply putting its logo on Ayala's clothing. It keeps finding ways to connect the athlete with her Filipino identity. And now New York enters the picture. If reports of major Nike advertising around the 2026 US Open are accurate, the timing is almost impossible to ignore. Ayala is arriving in New York at a career-high ranking, with her first WTA title already on her resume, a rapidly expanding fanbase, and a huge Filipino community in the city. New York is also one of the world's biggest advertising markets. And the US Open is one of the most visible stages in tennis. If Nike really is putting Ayala front and center there, the company may be doing more than promoting a tennis player. It may be introducing a potential future star to the biggest audience possible. But here's where the hype needs a reality check. Advertising doesn't hit forehands. A billboard can't save match point. A custom Nike outfit can't beat a top 10 opponent. Eventually, Alex Eala has to prove the investment on the court. That's the risk, because the bigger the marketing becomes, the bigger the expectations become with it. If Eala keeps winning, Nike's early attention starts looking incredibly smart. If the results stall, people will start asking whether the marketing arrived before the tennis. And that's what makes this story so fascinating. Maybe Nike is simply reacting to Alex Eala's explosion. Or maybe the company recognized something early and is now helping accelerate it, because if the second possibility is true, Nike isn't just sponsoring Ayala's rise, it could be helping turn that rise into something much bigger. Part 2 question: is Nike simply reacting to Alex Ayala's explosion, or helping accelerate it? This is where the Nike story gets dangerous for Alex Eala. Because once a global brand starts treating you like a future superstar, expectations start moving faster than your ranking. A year ago, Eala was still a promising young player trying to establish herself and convince the wider tennis world that she belonged. Now look at the situation. She's reached a career-high number 18, won her first WTA title, collected major top 10 victories, built an international following, and become one of the most recognizable young athletes coming out of the Philippines. Nike's attention is now part of that story, and that changes the question completely. It's no longer whether Alex Eala has potential, everyone can see it. The question is whether she can turn that potential into consistency at the highest level, and that's why the US Open matters so much. New York brings everything together at once: the Grand Slam, the cameras, Nike, the Filipino community, the growing fan base, and a player whose expectations are now completely different from what they were 12 months ago. Every win makes the Nike theory look smarter. Every major upset makes Eala's commercial ceiling look higher. Every deep run gives Nike another reason to put her in front of an even bigger audience. But the opposite is also true. If she goes out early, people will ask the uncomfortable question, did the marketing arrive before the tennis? That's the tension sitting underneath this entire story, because branding can accelerate an athlete's visibility, but it cannot manufacture elite results forever. At some point, the racket has to validate the campaign. Eala has already shown she can beat elite opponents. She has already won a WTA title. She has already climbed into the top 20. But staying there is harder than reaching it. The established stars now know the expectations are higher. The opponents have more information. And every tournament becomes another test of whether the breakout was a moment or the beginning of a sustained career at the top. Now imagine what happens if the next stage arrives. Imagine Eala reaches the top 10. Imagine she makes a Grand Slam semifinal. Imagine, eventually, she wins one. Suddenly, the custom Filipino-inspired Nike pieces, the headquarters appearances, and the New York advertisings don't look like aggressive marketing decisions anymore. They look like early positioning. They look like a brand recognizing an athlete before the rest of the market fully understood her value, and that's the gamble Nike may be making, not on who Alex Eala is today, but on who she could become. Because that's really the answer to the question we started with. What could Nike have seen before everyone else? Maybe it saw the talent, maybe it saw the ranking trajectory. But the more interesting possibility is that it saw the combination: a young, elite athlete, a huge national identity, a rapidly growing international audience, and a personality capable of carrying a story far beyond tennis. That combination is rare. And if Eala keeps winning, it becomes incredibly valuable. The US Open is where we start finding out whether that story is still a prediction or the beginning of reality. Alex Eala doesn't need Nike to make her a superstar. She needs to keep winning. But if Nike has already decided she's worth betting on, the rest of the tennis world may want to start paying attention. Because the most interesting part of this story isn't the Nike logo. It's what Nike may already believe is underneath it. Final question: did Nike identify Alex Eala's superstar potential early, or is the brand moving faster than the tennis?